Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are stepping into what we like to call the common room, broadcasting straight to you from the little station on Commercial Street in Atchison, Kansas.
Yeah, Chesterton Radio.
Right, Chesterton Radio. And I want you to just sort of imagine you're walking in from the cold, taking off your coat, pulling up a chair. We're all just gathering around a warm, glowing radio dial for an evening of shared exploration.
I love that. It's the perfect vibe for this.
Yeah, but to understand what we're looking at today, you need to know exactly what we pulled from the archives, because we're diving into this really specific stack of sources, historical broadcast logs, personal memoirs of a World War II naval commander, and most importantly, this surviving unedited piece of BBC archival audio.
Yeah, that's the real treasure here.
It really is. Like, when we look at history, we're usually looking at fossils, right? The big hard bones of what happened, treaties, casualty numbers.
Right, the dates and the facts.
Exactly. We can put them together and see the shape of the dinosaur, but we don't know what the air smelled like or how the light looked. But every once in a while, you don't find a fossil. You find a piece of amber.
Oh, with the mosquito trapped inside.
Yes, exactly. Trapped right there. You're not just looking at the DNA of the past, you're looking at the exact atmosphere, the literal air of a frozen moment in time. And the tape sitting on the desk in front of us right now is the most remarkable piece of audio amber I think I've ever encountered.
It genuinely defies the normal boundaries of historical media. I mean, on the surface, if you just look at the BBC logs, this tape is just a recording of the Home Service's Saturday Night Theater.
Right.
It's a radio adaptation of D.A. Rayner's novel, The Enemy Below, produced by Richard Emerson.
And if that were the whole story, it would still be this fantastic piece of media. But the broadcast date of this specific tape is what makes it a historical artifact.
Yeah, the timing is everything.
It aired on Saturday evening, November 23, 1963.
Which is, just a little over 24 hours after the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in Dallas.
Right.
And this Chesterton radio tape, it captures the entire 90-minute fictional drama, and then, without a single cut or interruption, the tape just keeps rolling.
It's wild.
It goes straight into a live BBC News broadcast dealing with the chaotic, grieving aftermath of that assassination.
So our mission today is to explore that eerie historical collision. Because you have this fictional meditation on death, duty, the heavy burden of leadership, right? And the fragile nature of life. And it's playing out into millions of British living rooms where a terrified public is suddenly grappling with those exact same themes in reality.
Right. In real time.
But before we get to the shock of 1963, we really need to understand the fiction of 1943 that these listeners were actively escaping into.
Yeah, what exactly is The Enemy Below?
Right, so the premise is remarkably stripped down. It's September 1943. We're in the South Atlantic.
Which is a notoriously empty, desolate stretch of ocean.
Exactly, far from the shipping lanes. And HMS Hecate, a British destroyer running without a convoy, picks up a radar contact.
And it happens to be a German U-boat, the U-121, caught running on the surface.
Right, and what unfolds is this grueling 40-hour battle of wits between the British commander, Morrell, and the U-boat captain, Peter von Stolberg.
And I kind of want to pause on that duration for a second, because we throw around phrases like battle of wits pretty lightly.
Yeah, we do.
I want the listener to really internalize this. Imagine you've been awake for 40 hours straight at your current job.
Oh, man. I'd be a wreck.
Right. Your eyes are burning, your brain is foggy, your nerves are completely shot. Now imagine that if you make a single mathematical error or misinterpret a tiny beep on a screen, everyone in your office dies violently.
Gosh, yeah, that is the psychological state these two men are operating in. It is agonizingly slow and just incredibly tense.
And that psychological pressure is entirely the point of the narrative. I mean, there's no air support coming. There are no convoys to hide behind. It's absolute isolation.
Just two experienced commanders testing each other's nerve.
Minute by minute, hour by hour.
Yeah, and I was reading the original radio script notes, and it struck me that radio might actually be the single greatest medium for this specific story.
Oh, absolutely. Better than film or a novel.
Yeah, because if you think about the reality of anti-submarine warfare, ASW, the enemy is literally invisible to the sailors on the surface.
Right, they're fighting a ghost.
Exactly. They're staring at dots on a radar screen or listening to the terrifying ping of the ASW sonar. And as a radio listener, you are stripped of your vision too, plunging you into the exact same sensory deprivation as the crews.
The medium perfectly mirrors the historical reality. You can't see the submarine, just like Commander Merle can't see the submarine.
Yeah.
You're forced to rely entirely on sound. And because of that visual void, the vocal performances in this BBC adaptation have to carry this immense amount of weight.
And Leo Genn plays Merle, and Gerard Hines plays von Stolberg.
And they don't play them as screaming action heroes.
No, not at all.
Their voices alone establish them as deeply intelligent, seasoned professionals who understand the grave responsibility they hold for the lives of their crews.
You can really hear the exhaustion layering into their voices as the hours tick by.
Yeah, but also this growing sort of grudging respect for one another. Like when von Stolberg realizes the British destroyer has turned to ram him instead of running away from his torpedo.
Right.
Hines delivers the line not with panic, but with this cold, almost admiring realization of his opponent's tactical brilliance.
I need to stop you there, because the physics and tactics of this whole duel are fascinating. But the source material assumes a level of naval knowledge I certainly didn't have before reading up on it.
It's pretty technical, yeah.
Yeah, how does this invisible duel actually work mechanically? I mean, finding a submarine in the open ocean in 1943 wasn't just dropping bombs and crossing your fingers.
Far from it. It was a highly technical, constantly evolving game of geometry and acoustic physics. By 1943, the Allies had refined two crucial technologies. The first was radar, which they used when the submarine was on the surface, recharging its batteries or moving quickly.
Right.
And the second was ASTIC, which the Americans referred to as sonar.
Gotcha.
And that was used when the submarine was submerged.
Right, and in the play, there's that brilliant early moment where von Stolberg dismisses a British radar ping as a, quote, ghost echo, like an atmospheric anomaly.
Yeah, and that single miscalculation gives the British the initial advantage. But once the U-boat dies and the British switch to ASTIC, the technology has this massive, terrifying flaw.
The blind spot.
Yes, the ASTIC blind spot is a pivotal factor in the tension of the story. Early ASTIC sets worked by sending out a directional beam of sound through the water to bounce off the submarine's hull.
Okay.
The operator sweeps this beam back and forth to get a bearing. But to actually attack with depth charges, the surface ship has to drive directly over the submarine.
And here's where I had to really wrap my head around it. It's kind of like trying to swat a fly in a pitch black room. You swing your hand toward where you heard the buzz a second ago, but as you get closer, you lose the sound.
Right.
Because the AS-to-C beam points outward and downward at an angle from the bottom of the destroyer.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. Yeah, as the surface ship approaches the target, the downward angle of that acoustic beam eventually passes completely over the submarine.
So the closer you get to your target, the less you can actually see it.
Exactly. Meaning, for the final, absolute most crucial moments of the attack run, the British destroyer is flying completely blind.
Entirely blind. Wow.
Commander Merle has to predict von Stolberg's speed and, heading based on the last known data point, set a course and just hope the U-boat didn't turn sharply at the last second.
It turns the culmination of this highly scientific approach into a terrifying guessing game.
It really does.
And let's talk about the weapons they're dropping during that guessing game. The depth charges. Because going into this, I assumed a depth charge was basically an underwater missile. I thought it had to physically impact the submarine to sink it.
Oh, right. Most people think that.
But that's fundamentally wrong, isn't it?
It is, and understanding the actual mechanism of a depth charge makes those scenes inside the U-boat so much more harrowing.
Right.
A depth charge is essentially a massive, heavy drum packed with explosives. They often used a compound called Torpex, which was significantly more powerful than standard TNT.
Okay.
But the key is a hydrostatic pistol, which is a pressure sensor on the outside of the drum.
Oh, so the crew on the destroyer sets a specific depth on this dial before they roll it off the back of the ship.
Correct.
Say like 150 feet.
Yeah, so the drum sinks, the water pressure builds against that sensor, and when it reaches the pressure equivalent to 150 feet, it detonates. It doesn't need to touch the submarine at all. The explosion creates a massive, rapidly expanding gas bubble. But more importantly, it creates a hydraulic shock wave.
Because water doesn't compress.
Exactly. Water does not compress. So that shock wave travels outward with immense, unforgiving force.
It's a hammer blow.
A catastrophic hammer blow. If that depth charge explodes within roughly 20 feet of the submarine, the hydraulic shock wave will literally crush the submarine's pressure hull.
It pops rivets out like
The
bullets.
rupture seams instantly floods the boat. Yeah.
So you put yourself in the shoes of the men inside the U-121. You're sitting in the dark, hundreds of feet underwater.
Uh-huh.
You can hear the propellers of the British destroyer passing directly over your head.
Hmm.
And you are just waiting in silence for a shockwave that could instantly crush the air right out of your lungs. I mean, the claustrophobia is unbearable, even just listening to it.
It is.
But it feels so visceral and grounded because the man who wrote it wasn't guessing.
No, D.A. Rayner. The authenticity of this entire artifact flows directly from his lived experience.
Denise Arthur Rayner wasn't just a pulp novelist researching in a library.
No, he was a Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve officer.
And I read in his memoirs that he actually had flat feet, which initially kept him out of the regular Navy. But when the war broke out, they needed everyone.
He really did.
And he didn't just serve a tour. He fought continuously for over 5 years through the absolute worst of the Battle of the Atlantic.
And that level of sustained combat experience in that specific theater is remarkably rare. I mean, he commanded escort vessels, ships like the HMS Highlander and the Pevensey Castle,
He was out there in the freezing, spray-drenched North Atlantic.
actively protecting convoys and hunting U-boats.
So he lived those 40-hour sleepless nightmares.
He did. And later in the war, he spent months in the underground tunnel complex of Fort Southwick, overseeing radar-guided plots of anti-submarine warships across the channel.
Oh, wow. So his understanding of this warfare was totally dual-layered.
Exactly. He knew the terrifying, freezing reality of standing on a Corvette bridge, but he also knew the cold, analytical geometry of a strategic command bunker.
But wait, this is where I really struggle with Rayner as an author.
Oh.
You're telling me a guy who spent 5 straight years having his ships torpedoed by German submarines, pulling freezing, oil-soaked sailors out of the water, sits down in 1956 and writes a book with a highly sympathetic German U-boat commander.
Yeah.
That seems incredibly cynical, or at least bizarrely forgiving, for a man who actually lived through that carnage. Like, why wouldn't he write von Stolberg as a total monster?
Well, because Rayner's worldview was forged by the environment he fought in, not just the politics of the war.
Yeah.
He famously described the sea as neither cruel nor kind.
It's just indifferent.
Exactly. It's
Point.
simply a massive, indifferent force that will kill anyone who disrespects it, regardless of the flag they fly. So his characters reflect this highly nuanced professional view of warfare.
And
He draws a very sharp distinction between fighting an enemy out of a sense of duty versus fighting out of ideological hatred.
so von Stolberg isn't a Nazi fanatic in the story?
Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
Rayner writes von Stolberg as a career naval officer from an aristocratic old world background. He actively detests the, quote, new Germany and its tyrannical leader.
Okay.
He finds absolutely no honor in the ideological rot of the war he's been ordered to fight.
Yeah, he still fights. He doesn't surrender.
He fights brilliantly, but he fights out of professional duty to his men, his ship, and his own sense of military honor. And Commander Merle on the British side recognizes this.
And keep in mind, Morel is written as a former merchant marine officer who actually lost his wife to a U-boat attack.
Right?
So if anyone has a right to be consumed by blind, furious hatred, it's Merle.
But instead, the battle becomes this crucible of mutual respect. It's not good versus evil. It's two highly skilled professionals trapped in the same terrible game, bound by the same indifferent ocean.
Which is a remarkably mature philosophical stance for a veteran to take. It completely strips away the propaganda and looks at the men underneath the uniforms.
Yeah, it really does.
I do want to take a slight detour here because a lot of our listeners are probably nodding along right now thinking they know this story, but they've never heard of this BBC radio broadcast or read Rayner's novel.
Ah, right. They know the 1957 Hollywood film version.
Exactly. The Enemy Below.
Directed by Dick Powell, starring Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jurgens. It's a classic in its own right.
But looking at the source materials, it seems like Hollywood just couldn't help but genetically modify Rayner's story. How far does the film stray from the British original?
Well, the most immediate change is the Americanization of the entire premise, which was pretty standard practice for Hollywood adaptations looking to secure the domestic box office.
Sure.
HMS Hecate is transformed into the USS Haynes, a Buckley-class destroyer escort.
Right.
And Commander Morel goes from being a reserved, grieving British officer to being played by the quintessentially American, stoic Robert Mitchum.
I can understand the casting change for box office draw, but it's the ending that I think really highlights the massive philosophical canyon between a combat veteran like Rayner and a 1950s Hollywood studio.
Oh, it really does. If you look at the studio production notes for the film, Dick Powell actually originally shot an ending that honored the spirit of Rayner's work.
Wow, really?
Yeah, in that original cut, Morell and von Stolberg are locked in this final desperate struggle as their ships are sinking. Morell plunges into the ocean in a doomed attempt to save the injured German commander, and the sea claims them both. They both drown.
Oh, man. I'm not surprised that didn't make it to theaters in 1957. That is a heavy, heavy ending for a Friday night at the movies.
Powell ultimately agreed.
Yeah.
He decided it was far too bleak for audiences. So they went back and filmed an alternate, highly upbeat ending where both commanders survive.
Of course they did.
Yeah, they're rescued together, they share a cigarette on the deck of an American ship, and practically become friends.
Classic.
Preview audiences overwhelmingly prefer the happy ending, so that's what became cinematic history.
But Rayner's original novel, which this 1963 BBC radio play faithfully adapts, does not give you that Hollywood comfort.
Not at all.
The combat is so relentless, the tactical calculations are so deadly, that in the end, both ships are utterly destroyed. The sea takes them both down.
It hammers home this theme of mutual sacrifice and the ultimate leveling power of the ocean.
Right, the water doesn't care if you're British or German.
It effectively strips away all the abstraction of war. It reduces these grand geopolitical conflicts down to wet, freezing men fighting for breath, which honestly brings us perfectly back to the core of this historical artifact.
Exactly. I want everyone listening to hold on to that concept, the stripping away of abstraction, because now we need to leave the fictional South Atlantic of 1943, and we need to travel to the evening of Saturday, November 23, 1963.
We have to try and reconstruct the psychological state of the British public on that specific evening. Just over 24 hours earlier, on Friday afternoon, President John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas.
The world is in a state of absolute paralyzing shock.
Utter shock, yeah.
We have to remember the geopolitical context here, too. The Cold War is at its absolute height. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the closest the world has ever come to total nuclear annihilation, was just a year prior.
Right.
Kennedy was this massive symbol of a new era of youthful leadership holding back the nuclear brink, and suddenly, violently, he is just gone.
And British listeners had spent all of Friday night and the entirety of Saturday glued to their televisions and radios, absorbing these chaotic, terrifying, heartbreaking reports filtering in from America.
There is this profound sense of global vulnerability. A young, powerful leader is dead. The geopolitical landscape suddenly feels incredibly fragile, like the guardrails of the world have just been removed.
And amidst all of this ambient terror and grief, at 8:30 p.m., the BBC Home Service decides to proceed with its scheduled programming. They air Saturday Night Theater.
Millions of people, likely seeking some form of comfort or just a desperate return to routine, turn their radio dials. And what pours into their living rooms is the enemy below.
They're listening to a 90-minute story, fundamentally about duty, the heavy life-or-death responsibility of leadership, and men being forced to face their own sudden mortality.
While the real world outside their windows is currently vibrating with those exact same themes, it is this haunting, completely unintentional collision of fiction and reality.
And this raises a vital question, one that is the central thesis of Rayner's play, but also perfectly mirrors the events of that November weekend. What happens when the enemy stops being an abstraction and becomes another fragile human being?
Let's trace that through the climax of the radio play first. For 40 agonizing hours, the enemy isn't a person. It's a dot on a radar scope.
It's a metallic ping on the ASTK.
It's a shadow slipping under the waves. The war is a game of geometry, physics, and machinery. But then, in the final act, the technology completely fails.
Bird ships are crippled and sinking.
Right. The machinery is gone, and the men are forced to abandon ship.
They end up literally face-to-face in the lifeboats, adrift in the wreckage.
In the original story, Morell and von Stolberg actually end up pulled into the exact same lifeboat. And initially, the momentum of the war continues. They get into this brutal physical fistfight right there in the boat.
A young German sailor hits Morell in the head with an oar.
Yeah, but eventually, the adrenaline burns out. The fisticuffs give way to this exhausted, pathetic mutual recognition. The abstraction of, quote, the enemy shatters.
They aren't uniforms anymore. They aren't dots on a screen.
No, they're just bleeding, exhausted human beings adrift in a massive ocean, waiting to die.
And if we carefully connect that narrative arc to the mood of November 1963, well, the Cold War was the ultimate abstract standoff.
Very true.
For over a decade, it had been entirely about ideologies, vast, invisible nuclear arsenals, and geopolitical maneuvering on maps. The enemy was a concept. They were just pings on a geopolitical radar screen.
It was the constant threat that a push of a button could end the world, but it all felt theoretical, like it was happening in secret bunkers and situation rooms.
But the sudden, visceral violence in Dallas stripped away all that abstraction in an instant. The assassination wasn't about geopolitical theory in that moment. It was about a husband violently dying in his wife's arms in the back of a car.
Oh, man. Yeah.
It left millions of ordinary people, thousands of miles away in Britain, suddenly confronting profound grief, their own vulnerability, and the incredibly fragile nature of human life.
The protective barrier of politics was shattered, just like the pressure hull of the U-121.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder how the audience felt sitting in their armchairs as the final somber notes of the play faded out.
Right.
But the incredible thing about the artifact provided by Chesterton Radio is that we don't have to guess what the atmosphere was in that moment because the tape doesn't stop.
This is the exact moment where the recording transcends being just a piece of entertainment history. It becomes a raw, invaluable historical document.
The 90-minute drama concludes.
Yeah.
The announcer comes on and calmly reads the credits. Leo Genn, Gerard Hines, Norman Claridge. The music swells and fades.
And then, seamlessly, with barely a breath in between, the listener is thrust violently back into the contemporary nightmare. The live BBC News broadcast begins.
What is so striking when you listen to the tape is the tonal shift. You go from this carefully produced, scored, and acted drama about a historical war from 20 years prior straight into the raw, unedited, crackling airwaves of history happening in real time.
The newsreader's voice is completely different from the actor's. It's clipped, it's somber, almost hesitant.
We hear the specific, granular details of a world in mourning. The broadcaster states that the Prime Minister was among more than 3,000 people who attended a special Requiem Mass at Westminster Cathedral that very morning.
The broadcast goes on to note that tomorrow morning at 10:30, the Prime Minister will attend a memorial service at Westminster Abbey.
It explicitly mentions tributes being paid in British synagogues across the country, too.
It outlines the immediate political mechanics of grief. It notes that both houses of Parliament will meet on Monday afternoon, specifically to pay their respects to the late president, and then they'll immediately adjourn.
Mr. Butler will speak in the Commons on behalf of the government, and the newsreader notes that Prime Minister Macmillan hopes to be well enough to attend.
Notice how this sudden, jarring shift completely collapses the distance between history and the present. For 90 minutes, the audience was safely tucked away in a controlled recreation of 1943.
Right.
But when that news broadcast states, the tape ceases to be a performance.
Yeah.
For those few trailing minutes of audio, we are actually listening to 1963 itself.
We can read about the global reaction to the Kennedy assassination in 100 textbooks,
Oh, wow.
We know the official timelines, the Warren Commission, the political fallout.
Yeah.
But hearing that somber BBC newsreader right on the heels of a play about the heavy, arbitrary toll of war, you can hear the shock in the room. You can feel the ambient, buzzing anxiety of a Saturday night where absolutely nobody knew what terrible thing might happen on Sunday.
It perfectly illustrates a phenomenon unique to archival media, really. Old radio recordings often preserve much more than just the scheduled programs.
Right. I mean, nobody at the BBC had a meeting and set out to create a profound artistic statement about human mortality by scheduling the enemy below for that specific night.
No, it was an accident of scheduling.
Yeah.
A bureaucratic coincidence.
But by capturing that evening uninterrupted, with its stark transitions, its announcements, its underlying societal anxieties, the magnetic tape preserves fragments of ordinary life that nobody intended to become history.
It captures the exact cultural temperature of a traumatized nation.
Which brings us back to where we started. Sitting here in the common room, broadcasting from the little station on Commercial Street, we've examined a fictional duel in 1943, a cinematic interpretation in 1957, and a very real weekend of mourning in 1963, all bound together on a single surviving strip of magnetic tape.
It's quite a journey.
It's a reminder that history isn't just a series of isolated textbook events. It's an ongoing conversation, often happening in the background of our daily lives, overlapping with our entertainment and our art.
Knowledge is most valuable when it forces us to reflect on our own context. Looking at this artifact forces us to apply a critical lens to our own media consumption and what we're leaving behind.
It really does. Because if a single accidentally preserved magnetic tape from 1963 can capture this profound collision of a shared cultural moment and a real-world tragedy, it makes you wonder about the digital archives we are building today.
Right. Think about how we consume media now. It's entirely fragmented. Algorithms feed us perfectly personalized streams of content.
We no longer have a home service that millions of people tune into simultaneously on a Saturday night.
Exactly.
Which brings up a slightly terrifying thought. As AI begins generating and curating our entertainment in real time, tailored perfectly to a sample size of one, will there even be a common room left?
That is the question.
60 years from now, when historians look back at our era, will they find any shared cultural moments where a whole nation processed a tragedy through the same piece of media? Or will they just find 8 billion isolated personalized feeds where no one experienced the same world at the same time?
Will there ever be another accidental historical artifact like this one?
Something to think about the next time you put your headphones on.